Welcome to my 17th Making Browser Games video. And in this video is going to be really short. And I know I say that a lot and then I record a lot, but this time I mean it because all we're going to be doing today is learning to split our HTML file into an HTML, JavaScript, and CSS file. Because I mentioned that previously, how we're kind of mixing three programming languages all in this one file. So all these tags and things like that, angle brackets, those are HTML. But the style and anything inside the style attribute, that's CSS, anything in the script, that's JavaScript. And there's a way to split all these up into different files, which I think is much better, much more organized, and it's so much easier to debug that way. And before we move on to graphics with Canvas, I wanted to be able to show you this. So what you need to do is open your file with your index.html file. And in the same directory, go ahead and create two more files. The first one will be style.css. There's nothing magical about the name, but it has to end in CSS. And we're going to make another file. I call it code.js, but the .js is the important part. So as you can probably guess, we just created the JavaScript file and the CSS file. So let's open these both up. Again, I do highly recommend Notepad++ just because it's really easy to work from different files here. Let's start with the style. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move this CSS code over to this style sheet, which is pretty easy to do since there's really not a lot of CSS in this page. Unfortunately, it's not as easy as just copying and pasting like that. You got to be a little bit more specific. So let's think of what we're doing. We are using the font size attribute for the paragraph tag. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to type P followed by two curly brackets, just like I was making a function. And inside of this function looking thing, that's where I'm going to type font size 40 pixels. So font dash size 40 pixels, exactly how this appears inside of the HTML here. Now, I wanted to talk a little bit more about the CSS before we move on. So this is how you code CSS in its own file. Instead of style equals this, you do the curly brackets, the name of the tag, and this. But the only problem with this is it would change every paragraph to have a font size of 40 pixels. Now, we could just correct this in the JavaScript, or a better idea, we need to make sure that only this paragraph gets the font size of 40 pixels. Only this paragraph. And how do I do that? Well, this paragraph has an ID number display. So maybe instead of specifying that I want all paragraphs to have a font size of 40 pixels, I can say pound number display, that is pound followed by the ID that you typed. That will force it to where only this HTML element will get this style. So I'm going to go ahead and delete the style now that we have it in our CSS. One more quick note, another way you could differentiate paragraph or differentiate tags is you could use a class. So we used an ID, which was really handy because we already had an ID for this paragraph. And we're saying that only the element in HTML with this ID will get this attribute, this CSS rule. Nothing else can. Now, instead of an ID, I wanted to briefly talk about classes. You could use a class. Instead of ID equals number display, you could say class equals number display. And then the appropriate change in the style.css would be p dot number display. Or you could just do dot number display in case you gave any other tag, like an h1 tag, the number display class. But for now, p.numberDisplay works. Now, the only difference between a class and an ID is a class can be applied to multiple items in your HTML. So I could have another paragraph class or another paragraph element that has the same class, number display. And what would happen is the CSS rule here would apply to both of them. But you cannot do that with an ID. An ID, only one tag can have an ID. So I'm going to go ahead and change this back to an ID now. I just wanted to explain the difference between IDs and classes. Now, we got to copy the JavaScript code over to the code.js file. And that's much easier because we don't have to actually change any formatting. We just take everything inside of the script tag and copy and paste it. Or I'll just cut it since we don't need it. I'll paste it there. It messed up all the indentation, so I'm just going to manually fix that. And there's my JavaScript. So I don't know what happened if some of my code didn't save from the last video we recorded, but you should turn back your random number to the random function here. And also, for some reason, my event listener is wrong. I have an opening parenthesis here, but no closing parenthesis or semicolon here. So I'm going to do that. I'm pretty sure I showed you guys to do that correctly and the code didn't save, but if there is an issue, go ahead and make those two changes. So now the JavaScript is successfully carried over. I can go ahead and delete the script tag here. Now, if we were to run our game, it's not going to do anything. It's not going to change the colors or the font size, and it's certainly not going to run our game. That's because we've separated our code files, but we have not linked code.js or style.css back to our HTML file. So here's how you do that. Let's start with the CSS. We're going to go over to the head tag in the HTML, and here, this is what I'm going to type. I'm going to type link href equals style.css rel equals style sheet. Now, to this day, I don't fully understand everything about this element here, but href is your directory or your path to the file, which is just style.css, the name of the file. You can think of it like that. Rel, I think, means relationship. So what is the relationship of this file to the rest of this document? And for us, it's a style sheet. That's what we want this file to be for. And so with that is done, let's change the background color of the number guessing game just to prove that this works. So I'm going to go above. I'm going to say, and remember to change the background color of the whole page, you can type body and then background color cyan, like that. And it did change the background color, so we know that the CSS is working now. I can go ahead and delete that. Now we need to link the JavaScript. And you actually already know partially how to link the JavaScript. We used the script tag before, and we just put the code in between the opening and closing tags here. Instead, what we're going to do is I'm going to put the script tag up here in head, and I'm going to type script source src equals code.js. Whatever you named your file here, code.js, that's what you're going to put here. Follow it by a closing script tag, and you'll have your code linked. Now, there's just one problem, because if we tried to run this, something's not going to work right. If I open the console, it says cannot read properties of null starting at line 15. So what's my line 15? Well, 15 is form.addEventListener. Here's what happened. So when we linked the code up here, the code ran immediately. Like as soon as you link the code to your HTML, it runs and it starts running, which means that we try to look for the form in the document. We look for the text box in the document, the number display, the feedback, because remember, all of these are just references to items in our HTML, and we're looking for these. As soon as this code is linked, we're looking for these. But the problem is the web page has not actually had time to create them. So up here, we are looking for HTML tags down here that actually do not exist yet. So the simple solution is to copy and paste this and only link the code at the very end once all your HTML has fully rendered and loaded. That will get rid of that error and we'll be able to play the guessing game here. I wanted to show you one final solution you could do. If you really like to have the script in the very top inside the head, which I kind of like because there's our CSS link here, so I kind of like to have the JavaScript link here. What you can do is actually delay the running of JavaScript by telling this code to only run once the window has fully loaded. Here's how you do that. I'm going to put all this code in a function called start, and I'm going to add a curly bracket there and a curly bracket down here, but I'm not going to change my indentation just because I don't really care. This function only serves one purpose. And at the very top, I say window.onLoad equals start. So I'm telling JavaScript, don't run this code until our window, our HTML website has fully loaded. Then, what is our onload function? It's going to be start, which is basically everything we had earlier. And with that, you'll see that that works as well. I can put 66 and our number game will work just fine. Thank you very much for watching.